The tomb door slammed shut behind her. Henutsen didn't scream. Her throat had already gone raw hours ago, when the priests dragged her through the necropolis in silence, their faces covered, their hands firm. Her husband, Kamudi, had been dead just 3 days, a royal guard fallen from favor, accused of treason. And by the ancient law, his widow was to be buried alive beside him, an offering to carry him into the afterlife. Henutsen had pleaded her innocence, shouted that she bore no part in Kamudi's alleged betrayal. But no one listened. Once the decree was signed by the high priest, her fate was sealed. Now she stood in the dark, her back pressed to the cold stone wall, the scent of myrrh and rotting linen thick in the air. Kamudi's corpse lay beside her in his ceremonial wrappings, his face hidden by a painted golden mask. He had always been quiet, loyal, and gentle. Too gentle for the politics of Thebes. His enemies had outnumbered him, and Henutsen suspected someone close had framed him. But there was no time to uncover truth. There was only this tomb, this silence, and the weight of death pressing against her chest. Her eyes adjusted slowly. A flicker of light from a crack in the ceiling showed stone jars filled with food, oils, and scrolls, burial goods for a man meant to journey beyond. But she was no corpse. She was alive, and that spark of breath inside her was not ready to surrender. Henutsen moved to the corner, clawed at the seam of the sealed door, cried out again. Nothing. No response. Only the quiet hum of death settling in. Hours passed. Maybe more. Her fingers bled, her nails broken. Then a sound, faint, like a scrape of metal on stone. She froze. The sound came again. She pressed her ear to the tomb door. On the other side, someone was working. Not a priest, not a rat. Metal on limestone, slow and careful. Her heart pounded as hope surged into her chest like a flood. The tomb door groaned softly. A sliver of torchlight cut through the darkness. A man's voice whispered, "Step back." She stumbled away, shielding her eyes. Dust fell. The stone shifted, and the door cracked open enough for her to see him. Tall, wrapped in desert robes, face half covered in linen, eyes sharp and unafraid. "I came for you," he said. Henutsen's voice trembled. "Who are you?" "Someone who knew Kamudi," he replied, "and someone who knows he was innocent." He held out his hand. Henutsen hesitated. She looked back once at the body of her husband, then stepped forward and took the stranger's hand. The tomb swallowed their shadows as they disappeared into the night, and for the first time since the day of judgment, Henutsen felt the fire of the living beat again inside her chest. Henutsen followed the stranger through the narrow passageway, the torch in his hand flickering against ancient limestone walls. Her legs ached, her feet scraped raw from the tomb floor, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She was alive, and each step away from the dead reminded her of what had nearly been stolen. When they reached the outer path that wound behind the necropolis, she finally asked, "What is your name?" He didn't look at her, only murmured, "Bekin." That name was unfamiliar, yet something in his voice felt known, rough but steady. They walked until the towering monuments of the dead were behind them, and only sand and rock remained. "Why did you come?" she asked. He stopped, turned to her, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, as if forced from him, he answered, "Because Kamudi saved me once. I owed him a life." She searched his eyes in the torchlight, trying to see the truth beneath the cloth that covered half his face. "You were one of the guards?" she asked. "No," he replied. "Worse. I was a prisoner." That struck her like a sudden blow. A prisoner? Kamudi had never spoken of this man, and yet Bekin had risked entering the city of the dead for her. "Why would a prisoner help a guard?" she whispered. He looked into the night, the wind tossing sand between them. "Because your husband knew justice. When others wanted to execute me for a crime I didn't commit, he stopped them. He spared me and gave me a second chance. That chance brought me here." The truth stunned her. Kamudi had kept so many things to himself, even his quiet acts of mercy. She thought of all the court whispers, the accusations, the forged letters that led to his disgrace. Someone powerful had wanted him gone. and she had nearly died beside him for it. "You knew he was innocent?" she asked. "Then why didn't you speak?" Beckon's eyes darkened. "I was banished. My voice carried no weight. If I had come near the palace again, they would have killed me too." The silence stretched between them. Then Henutsen nodded. "So you watched from the shadows." "Until the moment came to repay a debt," he said. They reached a small cave nestled in a ridge overlooking the desert. Beckon led her inside and lit another torch, revealing a modest hideout with water skins, bread wrapped in cloth, and a rolled sleeping mat. He motioned for her to sit. She did slowly, exhaustion finally pulling at her limbs. "You were ready to die," he said quietly. "But you didn't." Henutsen met his gaze. "I was afraid, but I was more afraid to leave the truth buried forever." Bacon nodded once. "Then we will dig it out." She looked at him. This man with a past as broken as hers, and perhaps a reason to fight just as strong. "How?" she asked. He knelt and pulled a bundle from beneath the mat. Inside was a scroll, sealed with the mark of the priesthood. "Because I stole the letter that named Kamudi a traitor," he said. "And I know who forged it." Henutsen's breath caught in her throat. The trap that had ended her husband's life and nearly buried her alive was about to be undone. Henutsen stared at the scroll in Beckon's hands, her heart pounding like war drums in her chest. The seal was unmistakable, deep red wax, stamped with the sacred falcon of the high priest's council. Only the highest-ranking scribes and temple elders could imprint such a mark. If it was forged, it meant someone within the priesthood itself had conspired to destroy Kamudi. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice low, wary of the weight it carried. "From the tent of a scribe named Pa Nejum," Beckon replied. "He was sent with the execution order. While the priests performed the burial rites, he left it behind." Henutsen's jaw tightened. She remembered that man, tall, thin, with trembling fingers and a face too young for such sacred power. He had not met her eyes when he read the verdict aloud. At the time, she had thought it was shame. Now she wondered if it had been guilt. "And you took it?" she asked. "It was buried with Kamudi," Beckon said. "I returned after nightfall and removed it before the door was sealed." She clenched her fists. "So all of this, the accusations, the death sentence, my imprisonment, it began with that lie." Beckon nodded. "And whoever forged it has many more lies to protect. That's why they buried you alive. Not just to punish a widow, but to erase the one person who might question the truth." Henutsen's mind raced. She had lived quietly by Kamudi's side, watching politics from the edge of the court. She remembered the tension in the palace before his arrest, the nobleman who had suddenly been promoted, the priest who whispered more than he prayed, and the disappearances that were never explained. "There was one who hated him," she said slowly. "Menket, the overseer of temple guards. He feared Kamudi's loyalty to the queen. He once said no man should serve a woman so boldly." Bacon's eyes narrowed. "Then Menket may be the one we seek." "But he is powerful," she added. "He has the queen's ear now." "Power does not make a man invincible," Bacon said. "But truth makes him afraid." She looked down at the scroll again. "Can we prove it's false?" Bacon reached into his robe and pulled out another piece of parchment, older, brittle with age. "This is Kamudi's true record. It bears the same seal, but this one is genuine. If we compare the signatures, the ink strokes, the press of the ring, it will show the forgery." Henutsen's mind reeled with the possibilities. If the scroll could be verified, it could exonerate Kamudi. But it would also make her a threat again. "If we go back," she said, "they'll kill us before we speak." Bacon didn't hesitate. "Then we won't speak at the palace." He unrolled a crude map drawn in charcoal. "We go to the healer's sanctuary in Abydos. The priests there oppose Menket's rule. If we can reach them, they will carry the truth where we cannot." She stared at the path drawn across dunes and cliffs and sacred ground. It was long and dangerous, but not as dangerous as silence. She reached forward and picked up the forged scroll. It burned in her hands, not with heat, but with the weight of justice denied. "Then we leave at first light," she said. This time I walk not as a widow, but as a witness." They left before dawn, the desert still asleep under a veil of shadows. Henutsen wrapped herself in a coarse cloak Becken had given her, her face hidden beneath a scarf smeared with sand. Becken led the way with a hunter's stride, his steps silent and sure as they descended into the dry riverbed that led toward the cliffs. He had chosen a path few dared to take, through the Jackal's Pass, a cursed canyon where bones littered the ground and echoes made men doubt their own minds. But it was also the fastest route to Abydos, and Becken believed speed would be their only shield. They walked in silence for hours, the sun slowly rising behind them, turning the red cliffs into walls of fire. Henutsen said nothing, but she watched him. There was a scar behind his right ear, old and faded, a prisoner's mark. He never spoke of what had happened to him in the past, but his body carried stories even silence couldn't hide. When they reached the narrow mouth of the pass, Becken stopped and pulled a curved blade from beneath his cloak. "This place doesn't just frighten children," he said. "There are men who hide here, bandits, outcasts, worse." "I'm not afraid," she answered, though her heartbeat betrayed her. "Good," he replied. "Stay close, and don't speak unless I tell you." The canyon swallowed them whole. Jagged stones jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The walls loomed high and close, trapping heat and sound. Every footstep echoed louder than it should. Bones lay scattered along the path, goat, deer, human. Henutsen tried not to look at them. She kept her eyes on Becken's back and forced herself to keep moving. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Becken froze. His hand lifted slightly, signaling her to stop. 3 men emerged from behind the rocks, their faces rapt, their eyes gleaming with the hunger of scavengers. "What do we have here?" one sneered. "A lost traveler and his veiled bride?" "We're not here for trouble," Becken said calmly. "Then you should have stayed home," another said, raising a spear. In one swift movement, Becken stepped forward and slashed with his blade, striking the nearest man across the arm. The others lunged, but Henutsen didn't scream. She grabbed a rock from the ground and struck the one closest to her knee. He fell with a grunt. Becken moved like a storm, fast, focused, unforgiving. When it was over, 2 men fled into the rocks, the third groaning where he lay. Becken didn't look back. He grabbed Henutsen's arm. "We run now!" They sprinted through the pass, breath ragged, feet scraping over stone. By the time they reached the far side, the sun was overhead and the canyon behind them. They collapsed near a dried acacia tree, panting. "You didn't hesitate," Becken said, surprised. "You fought." "I buried my fear in a tomb," she said. "It's not coming back." He looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. "Then you'll survive this journey." She didn't answer. She only looked at the horizon, where the path to Abydos waited, and with it, a chance to burn away every lie. Dust clung to Henutsen's skin as they approached the outskirts of Abydos 3 days later. Her lips were cracked, her feet blistered, and her body ached with every step. But her eyes stayed sharp. The scrolls remained tightly bound beneath her cloak, wrapped in linen soaked with palm oil to protect them from the heat. Becken walked beside her, scanning the horizon, ever watchful. They had passed through dry valleys and ancient burial lands, where forgotten gods whispered in the wind. Once, a vulture followed them for half a day before disappearing into the cliffs. They spoke little. Every word saved was strength preserved. Abydos rose from the desert like a faded dream, stone temples, crumbling walls, and a scent of incense clinging to the breeze. Pilgrims came here to honor the dead, but beneath the sacred facade lived men and women who defied the high priest's rule. It was here that Becken said they would find Akatep, the healer. "He served with Kamudi once," Becken explained. "Before the wars, before the silence." They entered the sanctuary through a narrow side gate carved into the rock. Henutsen noticed how Becken avoided the main roads. Every step, every turn, was chosen. He knew this place well. Inside the sanctuary, it was cooler. The air smelled of crushed herbs and old prayers. A boy greeted them, no older than 10, and led them past hollow-eyed patients and clay jars stacked on shelves. Finally, they stopped before a man bent over a mortar, grinding resin. His hair was silver, tied back with a faded strip of linen. Scars lined his arms. When he turned, his eyes locked on Bacon's. "You should not be here," he said. "And yet, here I am," Bacon replied. Akatep looked at Henutsen, then at the linen bundle she clutched. "That scroll could cost you both your lives." "It already nearly did," Henutsen said. "Now it must cost the ones who forged it." Akatep sighed, motioned them to sit, and took the scroll. He unwrapped it carefully, reading in silence. His fingers traced the wax seal. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a glass lens. "The seal is false," he confirmed. "The ink used for the signature, it's mixed with ochre. The real priests use only obsidian powder." Henutsen leaned forward. "You can prove it." "I can," he said. "And more. This handwriting, I've seen it before. It belongs to Menket's personal scribe." Bacon's eyes hardened. "Then Menket's guilt is no longer hidden. But justice isn't declared in whispers," Akatep warned. "The High Court won't listen to a widow and an exile." "Then they'll listen to you," Henutsen said. "You were once their healer." "I walked away from them," he replied, "because I saw what they had become." "And now you see what they've done," she said. "Will you still stay silent?" Akatep stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. "I'll prepare the evidence, but you must leave tonight. If they learn you're here, Abydos won't protect you." "Where do we go?" she asked. He pointed to a mark on a faded map hanging behind him. "There's a merchant caravan leaving for Waset. One of the Queen's advisors travels with it. Show him this truth. If she sees it, she may reopen Kamuti's case." Henutsen stood, her strength renewed. For the first time, she wasn't chasing survival. She was chasing justice. "Then we'll leave by dusk," she said. "And I won't stop until she sees what they buried with him." The caravan was already moving when Henutsen and Bacon joined at the outer edge. 20 camels, 5 wagons, and over 30 travelers winding through the low desert paths between Abydos and Waset. Traders spoke in hushed tones, guarding goods beneath layers of cloth. Armed escorts rode beside them, silent and alert. Bacon had bribed the caravan master with an old silver ring and a promise: no questions, no delays. Henutsen wore a veil and kept her head low, her heart steady but cautious. Somewhere within the caravan was their target: Nefermenu, a royal advisor known for his loyalty to the queen and his quiet distaste for Menket. Akatep had written a sealed letter for him, vouching for the scroll's authenticity. Henutsen held it close, tied beneath her sash, the weight of justice pressing against her ribs. For 2 days they moved beneath the scorching sun, through crumbling valleys and thorned fields. At night fires were lit in small pits, and Bacon stayed awake, watching every movement. "They'll come," he said one night, sharpening his blade. "Menket's spies are everywhere." "Then we find Nefermenu first," she replied. On the 3rd evening she saw him, tall, clean robes, a scroll bag across his shoulder, speaking softly with a scribe near the lead wagon. His face was serious, but not cruel. Bacon nodded when she pointed him out. "Now," he whispered. Henutsen approached Nefermenu just as he stepped away from the group. She pulled the sealed letter from her sash and offered it with both hands. "From Akatep of Abydos," she said. He took it slowly, eyes narrowing at the name. He opened it, read quickly, and then looked up at her. "Who are you?" "The widow of Kamuti," she answered. "Buried alive by a lie." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he tucked the letter into his robe. "Walk with me." They moved toward the rear of the caravan. Nefermenu's voice was low. "This letter names a forged decree. It accuses a priest of treason. Do you understand the storm this could bring?" "I lived inside that storm," she said. "Now I want to end it." He nodded slowly. "Menket has long overreached. The queen suspects it, but she needs proof. This could be it." "It is," she said. And there's more. I carry the false scroll. Then guard it with your life, he said. We reach Waset in 2 days. I will bring you to her. But they didn't have 2 days. That night, 2 riders peeled from the darkness. One struck a guard in silence, the other aimed straight for Henutsen's tent. Becken caught the movement and was already running. Steel met steel in the dark. Henutsen dove aside as a dagger slashed through the tent. Becken tackled the attacker, pinned him, and drove his blade into his chest. The second man fled into the dunes. Henutsen crawled from the wreckage, clutching the scroll. Nefermenu arrived moments later, his face pale. "Spies," he muttered. "They knew." Becken stood over the dead man. "We need to move now, before more come." "No," Nefermenu said. "We travel together, in the open, no more shadows." He looked at Henutsen. "When we reach Waset, you will speak before the queen herself, and this time no one will silence you." Waset shimmered beneath the midday sun, its towering gates guarded by spearmen in gold-plated armor. The caravan passed through without delay, led by Nefermenu's royal seal. Henutsen's heart pounded as the city swallowed them. She had walked these streets once as a soldier's wife. Now she returned as a survivor bearing the proof of a deadly lie. Inside the palace, silence reigned like a spell. Servants stepped lightly, voices hushed in reverence. The scent of lotus and cedar clung to the cool marble halls. Nefermenu led her and Becken through a side entrance, avoiding the main courtyards. "She agreed to see you privately," he said, "but speak with caution. Her faith is deep, but her patience is short." Henutsen nodded, adjusting the scroll hidden beneath her sash. Becken walked beside her, his eyes scanning every corridor, every shadow. They were escorted into a chamber adorned with wall paintings of Isis and Ma'at. At the far end sat the queen, tall, poised, draped in linen white as sun-bleached bone. Her eyes were lined with kohl, her expression unreadable. "You bring me ghosts," she said quietly. "A dead man's name, a widow's pain. Why now?" Henutsen stepped forward, bowed deeply, and spoke, "Because I was buried with him, my queen, and lived to carry his truth." The queen raised a brow, but said nothing. Henutsen continued, "My husband, Kamudi, was no traitor. He was executed on the word of a forged scroll. I carry both the lie and the proof." She held out the 2 scrolls, one genuine, one false. Nefermenu stepped forward and unrolled them for the queen. He explained the differences, the ink, the seal, the handwriting, the testimony from Akhetep of Abydos. The queen listened in silence. Then she stood and crossed to the scrolls herself. She studied them without speaking. When she looked up, her voice was like the edge of a blade. "Do you know what this means? If true, Menkat has not only betrayed this court, he has perverted our law, murdered a loyal guard, and nearly buried a queen's justice." "He did worse," Henutsen said. "He taught others that power can silence truth. I am here to unlearn that lesson." The queen stared at her for a long moment, then turned to a scribe. "Summon the council," she ordered. "This matter will be judged in full light." "He won't come quietly," Nefermenu warned. "Then he will come in chains," the queen replied. She looked at Henutsen. "You will speak, before them all. Tell them everything." Henutsen's breath caught. She had imagined this moment, but never believed it would arrive. "I will," she said, "even if it ends with me." The queen's gaze softened slightly. "Not this time," she said. "This time, you will not stand alone." As they left the chamber, Becken leaned close. "You were brave. I was broken," she whispered. "But not anymore." For the first time, Henutsen walked the palace halls not as a servant or sacrifice, but as a woman with fire in her voice and the law on her side. The shadows that once threatened to swallow her had become the light she carried forward. The palace court gathered as the sun reached its peak, casting long golden rays through the open columns of the judgment hall. High officials, temple scribes, and city elders took their places beneath carved statues of Ma'at and Ra. Incense curled in the air, solemn and slow. At the center stood Henutsen, no longer veiled, no longer hidden. Her face was bruised by the desert, her hands scarred by stone, but her eyes held something unshakable: truth. Nefermenu stood to her right, scrolls prepared, and Bekin stood behind her, silent, watchful. On the opposite side, Menket entered flanked by guards, not to protect him, but to ensure he did not flee. His robes were finer than ever, but his face betrayed the tension behind the polished mask. The queen took her seat upon the stone dais, her voice ringing out with authority. "Today we weigh the word of a widow against the word of a priest. Let the truth speak through them." Henutsen stepped forward and bowed. "I am Henutsen, wife of Kamudi, who was buried as a traitor. I survived the tomb meant to silence me, and I bring evidence that the judgment passed upon him was false." Gasps stirred among the crowd, but the queen raised her hand for silence. "Continue." Henutsen held up the scroll, her voice steady. "This decree condemned my husband, but it bears a forged seal, an ink never used by temple scribes. The writing is not from the high priest, but from Menket's own scribe, written under his orders." Nefermenu unrolled both scrolls before the council, presenting markings, discrepancies, and Akhetep's written testimony. "Let the court see," he said, "that these are not the same. One is truth, the other, treachery." Menket stepped forward, his tone cold. "These are the desperate lies of a woman grieving. She was found mad with grief beside her dead husband, accusing shadows. She survived because someone saved her," Bekin said, stepping into the light. "I removed her from the tomb. I witnessed the seal, and I saw her fight for her life with her own hands." Murmurs grew louder. Menket's face hardened. "And who are you to speak before this court?" "A man who was once condemned unjustly," Bekin replied. "Saved by Kamudi, the very man you called a traitor." The queen leaned forward, eyes locked on Menket. "You had the authority to carry out his execution. Did you verify the scroll before it was read aloud?" Menket hesitated. "It bore the seal. That was sufficient." "But you knew the scribe," she pressed. "You selected him, you promoted him, and his ink has betrayed him." A priest stepped forward from the council, examining both scrolls with the lens. He bowed. "The widow speaks truth. This seal is false." The hall erupted. The queen stood, her voice silencing all. "Menket, you are stripped of title and power. You will be held until a full judgment is passed by the temple of Ma'at." Menket tried to speak, but the guards gripped his arms. Henutsen closed her eyes, the weight of years lifting from her chest. Her husband's name, once buried under stone and shame, was finally free. The queen looked at her and nodded. Justice was delayed, but not denied. "Go now, widow of truth. Let the city remember who you are." And as Henutsen stepped out of the hall, the people didn't turn away. They watched her, not as a victim, but as the voice that shook stone. The sun had begun to fall as Henutsen walked through the streets of Waset, no longer veiled or hidden by shadow. Word had spread quickly of the widow who returned from death, of the priest unmasked, of the queen's decree. Merchants paused mid-bargain to glance at her with quiet awe. Mothers whispered her name to their children, and elders muttered blessings beneath their breath. But Henutsen did not walk for recognition. She walked to the memorial garden of the honored dead, where the names of the queen's loyal guards were carved into the sandstone wall. She had visited this place once, years ago, when Kamudi's name was still spoken with pride. Now she approached it with a single goal: to see his name returned. At the gate stood a royal scribe, holding fresh carving tools. "The queen sent word," he said. "His name will be restored tonight." Henutsen nodded. "Then I will stay until the last letter is carved." As the scribe began, chiseling one careful stroke at a time, Bekin stood silently behind her. He had remained by her side not as a protector anymore, but as something more difficult to name. She turned to him. "You could leave now. You've repaid your debt." He looked at her. his voice quiet. It stopped being about debt a long time ago. She didn't respond, but something in her eyes softened. The carving continued. Each letter echoed in the quiet garden, each stroke peeling back the injustice of the past. As night fell, oil lamps were lit along the pathway, casting golden light on the wall. When the scribe stepped back at last, Kamuti's name stood clear among the honored. Henutsen stepped forward, traced the stone with her fingers. "Now he can rest," she whispered. But peace would not come easily. Nefermenu arrived shortly after, holding another scroll. "The queen has summoned the temple council," he said. "They will conduct a formal trial of Menket, and she has requested your presence. She wants you to speak once more." "Hasn't the truth been proven?" Henutsen asked. "Yes," he said. "But the people must hear it with their own ears, so that no one dares to bury truth again." Henutsen took the scroll, feeling the weight of responsibility settle upon her again. She thought of Kamuti, his quiet loyalty, his unwavering honor, and of the silence that had nearly claimed her. She would not let silence win again. Later that night, as they returned to their chambers, Henutsen stood at the balcony overlooking the city. Bekin joined her, the wind brushing his robe against hers. "What will you do when the trial ends?" he asked. "Return to the life you had before?" She shook her head. "There's no life waiting behind me, only the one I build now." "And will you build it alone?" he asked. She looked at him, her answer unspoken. But the distance between them was no longer wide. In the darkness, she reached out, took his hand, and for a moment, neither of them felt like ghosts anymore. Tomorrow, there would be another chamber, another court. But tonight there was silence without fear, and the name of a good man returned to the light. The great hall of the Temple of Maat had never held so many. Candles lined the marble steps, and the gods looked on from their high pillars with stone faces and ageless eyes. Every seat was filled. Priests, nobles, soldiers, scribes, and even farmers drawn in from the edges of Waset. This was no ordinary trial. This was reckoning. Menket stood shackled before the council, stripped of his ceremonial robes, his head bare. His scribe had already confessed under temple questioning, his words burned into official record. But it was not enough for the people. They wanted to hear the woman who returned from the tomb. Henutsen stood at the center. No veil, no cloak, only truth. The queen sat high above, robed in judgment, her eyes fixed on the widow who had become the voice of the forgotten. "Henutsen," said the high priest, "you may speak." She stepped forward, her voice calm but fierce. "I was buried with my husband in the tomb of the traitors. My breath was not meant to continue, but it did. And that breath now carries what you tried to silence, a truth heavier than gold." The hall was still. "Kamuti was loyal," she continued. "He served this land without greed, without ambition. He died because power fears honor, and because one man, Menket, decided his truth was too dangerous." Murmurs rippled across the room. She held up the forged scroll. This document, created by Menket's own scribe, sealed a death unjustified. Its seal is false, its ink a lie, its intent murder. She handed it to the priest, who displayed it before the council. The queen nodded to the witness scribe. "Read the confession." The hall listened in silence as the scribe's words were spoken aloud. His guilt, his orders from Menket, the reward promised to him for Kamuti's fall. When it ended, the queen stood. "Menket," she said coldly, "you serve this court. You misused its name, you corrupted its laws, you buried the innocent. Today, you are condemned by the very justice you claim to uphold." She turned to the guards. "Let his sentence reflect what he gave, life stolen without mercy." The guards led him away in chains, his eyes hollow, his silence finally earned. The people did not cheer. They stood in respect, for truth had spoken, and truth required no applause. The queen looked again to Henutsen. "You gave us back the law and reminded us why it matters." "I did it for him," she said, "and for the ones who will never have the chance." Later, as the sun set over the Nile, Henutsen stood on the palace balcony once more. The city stretched below her, no longer a maze of memories, but a place that listened. Beckon approached quietly. "It's finished," he said. She turned to him, a quiet smile in her eyes. "No," she said. "It's just begun." He nodded. "Then what do we do now?" She looked toward the horizon. "We live, not in hiding, not in fear, but openly, with names that mean something again." Bacon offered his hand. She took it, not as a symbol of rescue, but of choice. And as night fell over Waset, Henutsen, once a widow, once a sacrifice, walked forward not as the woman who survived the tomb, but as the one who changed the story carved into its walls.